In the Gilan province of northern Iran sits Masule, a village built in such steep terraced layers that the roof of one house often becomes the street for the house above it. There are no roads for vehicles here, only stone stairways and narrow alleys that climb the mountainside like the rungs of a ladder. This design was not an accident of geography, but a deliberate response to it, because the surrounding slopes are prone to landslides. Building outward rather than upward would have meant losing precious stable ground. The region receives heavy rainfall and earthquakes, threatening the packed earth and wooden structures that have stood here for centuries. Despite the danger of shifting soil, the community has preserved its architecture almost unchanged, refusing modern rebuilding that might compromise its unique character. Masule remains a place where every rooftop is also someone else's front door, a village that climbs a mountain to find its place in the world. In the Gilan province of northern Iran, near the Caspian Sea, sits a village unlike almost anywhere else on the planet. Masule is built in such steep, terraced layers that the roof of one house often becomes the courtyard or street for the house above it. There are no roads for vehicles here, only stone stairways and narrow alleys that climb the mountainside like the rungs of a ladder. This design was not an accident of geography, but a deliberate response to it because the surrounding slopes are prone to landslides, and building outward rather than upward would have meant losing precious stable ground. The region receives heavy rainfall and is occasionally shaken by earthquakes, both of which threaten the packed earth and wooden structures that have stood here for centuries. Despite the danger of shifting soil beneath thousand-year-old foundations, the community has preserved its architecture almost unchanged, refusing modern rebuilding that might compromise its unique character. Masule remains one of the most photographed and least understood villages in Iran, a place where every rooftop is also someone else's front door. From a village that climbs a mountain, we move to one that hides inside the desert's oldest fortress, the rock itself. In the arid hills of southern Tunisia, near the Sahara's northern edge, lies Chanini, a centuries-old Berber village built into the natural caves and cliffs of a rocky mountain range. For generations, the indigenous Amazigh people carved their homes directly into the mountainside, seeking refuge from both the punishing desert heat and the constant threat of invasion throughout North African history. These cave dwellings kept interiors naturally cool, sometimes by 20 degrees or more, compared to the desert outside, a passive cooling system that modern architecture still studies today. Life here has always meant surviving extremes, blistering daytime heat, freezing desert nights, and long periods of isolation from larger towns across difficult terrain. Some residents still maintain these ancestral cave homes, even as a newer village has grown at the base of the mountain, and the old settlement now stands partly as a living monument to a way of life that refused to disappear. Rockfall and erosion remain a quiet danger in the cliffs above, but for the people of Chanini, this landscape has always been both shelter and history. If a desert village hidden in rock feels remote, nothing compares to a settlement in Mali that clings to a cliff face nearly 100 kilometers long. Stretching across the Bandiagara escarpment in central Mali, a sandstone cliff that runs for almost 150 kilometers, the Dogon people built one of the most extraordinary cliffside civilizations on Earth. Their villages sit wedged into ledges and crevices along the cliff face, some accessible only by climbing narrow paths or ancient wooden ladders worn smooth by centuries of use. Long before the Dogon themselves settled here, the Telem people are believed to have built even higher into the rock, leaving behind granaries and burial sites that modern archaeologists still study, their exact construction methods only partially understood. The Dogon adopted this vertical landscape both for defense against historical raiders and to preserve scarce farmland on the plains below for crops instead of homes. Life on the escarpment means constant exposure to falls, flash floods during the rainy season, and a harsh, unforgiving climate for most of the year. The Dogon also carry a rich cosmology and oral tradition passed down through masked ceremonies and rituals, some of which anthropologists have studied for their sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Though how that knowledge was originally acquired remains debated among researchers. This is a landscape where mythology and survival have always lived side by side. From an African escarpment, we travel to a mountain kingdom where an entire village dangles above a valley in Yemen. In the Haraz Mountains of western Yemen, at an altitude of roughly 2,000 meters, sits Al-Hajjara, a fortified stone village that appears to grow directly out of the mountain ridge itself. Its multi-story stone towers, some rising 5 or 6 floors, were built centuries ago not just for shelter but for defense, allowing residents to see approaching danger from a great distance across the surrounding peaks. The terraced landscape around the village required generations of labor to carve into the mountainside, turning near vertical slopes into productive farmland for coffee and grain. Steep drop-offs surround much of the village, and the mountain roads leading to it are narrow, exposed, and treacherous, especially during the region's sudden and heavy seasonal rains. Yemen's broader instability in recent years has made travel to this region far more difficult and dangerous than in the past, adding a modern layer of risk to an already isolated existence. Yet Al-Hajjara's architecture endures as one of the finest examples of ancient Yemeni mountain engineering, a fortress built by people who understood that in this landscape, height meant survival. Now we travel to a village in China where the only road in was carved by hand, one hammer strike at a time. Guoliang Village. Deep in the Taihang Mountains of Henan Province, China, the story of Guoliang Village centers on something almost unbelievable, a road tunnel carved directly through solid rock by the villagers themselves. For generations, Guoliang existed in near total isolation, connected to the outside world only by a treacherous stone stairway cut into a cliff face. So dangerous that emergencies and supply shortages were a constant threat to life. In the 1970s, a small group of villagers decided they had endured enough isolation and began hand-carving a road through the mountain. Using little more than hammers, chisels, and sheer determination, a project that took years and cost several lives during construction. The resulting tunnel cut directly into the cliffside with open windows looking out over a sheer drop. Remains one of the most dangerous and remarkable roads in the world, drawing both awe and vertigo from anyone who drives it. Even today, the surrounding cliffs are prone to rockfall, and the region's mountain roads remain narrow and unforgiving, especially in poor weather. Guoliang stands as proof of what desperation and community can accomplish against a landscape that offered no easy answers. From a road carved by human hands, we move next to a village that survives some of the heaviest snowfall on the planet, Shirakawa-go. In the mountainous Gifu prefecture of Japan, Shirakawa-go is famous for its steep, thatched roof farmhouses built in a style known as Gasho Zukuri, meaning hands folded in prayer, a name inspired by the roof's dramatic triangular shape. That shape is not merely decorative, it is a direct survival response to the region's extraordinarily heavy snowfall, which can bury lower rooftops and collapse flatter structures under sheer weight. The steep angle allows snow to slide off before it accumulates to dangerous levels, a design refined over centuries by a community isolated for much of the year by impassable mountain roads. Winters here can bring several meters of snow, cutting villages off from supplies and medical help for extended periods before modern infrastructure eased that isolation. Historically, the region also relied on silk production inside these very roof spaces, using the attic areas warmed by the living space below. Fires remain one of the greatest dangers to these wood and thatch structures, and the community has developed extensive fire suppression systems, including dramatic winter drills where water cannons blast up and over the rooftops in unison. Shirakawa-go survives today as a rare example of architecture shaped entirely by a hostile climate. From the deep snow of Japan, we travel to a mountain village in the Caucasus where towers were built not against weather but against blood feuds. Ushkuli. In the Svaneti region of Georgia, in the shadow of Mount Shkara, one of the highest peaks in the Caucasus Range, sits Ushkuli, often cited as one of the highest continuously inhabited settlements in Europe. The village is instantly recognizable for its Svan towers, tall defensive stone structures built roughly 1,000 years ago. Originally constructed to protect families during medieval blood feuds and to provide refuge during avalanches and invasions. Ushkuli sits at an elevation high enough that heavy snow can isolate it from the rest of Georgia for months at a time, historically cutting residents off from medical care, trade, and outside contact through the harshest parts of winter. The surrounding mountains are also prone to avalanches, and the roads leading into the valley remain difficult and sometimes impassable even with modern vehicles. Despite this isolation, the Svan people preserved a distinct culture, language, and set of customs found almost nowhere else, protected in part by the very inaccessibility that also threatens them. Life in Ushkuli has always required a kind of resilience shaped by both nature and history intertwined. From ancient defensive towers, we now descend toward a place where the ground itself is unstable, an island of villages perched above an active caldera, Santorini's caldera villages. On the Greek island of Santorini, the villages of Oia and Fira do not merely overlook the sea, they cling to the rim of one of the most violent volcanic calderas on Earth. This crescent-shaped island was formed after a catastrophic Bronze Age eruption, one of the largest volcanic events in recorded human history, believed to have influenced ancient civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean. The whitewashed homes that draw millions of visitors each year sit directly above hundreds of meters of collapsed volcanic rock, with the volcano beneath the bay still classified as active and closely monitored today. In recent years, the region has experienced swarms of seismic activity, a reminder that the geological forces that created this beauty have never fully gone silent. Steep cliffside paths, narrow stairways, and centuries-old buildings mean that even everyday movement here carries some risk, and any significant seismic event could threaten both structures and lives. Yet this same volcanic soil produces some of the most prized wine grapes in the world, grown in low, basket-shaped vines designed to survive fierce winds and drought. Santorini remains a place where extraordinary beauty and geological danger are permanently fused together. From a Greek volcano, we travel deep into Central Asia to a valley so remote that its language exists nowhere else on Earth. In the mountains of Tajikistan, the Yagnob Valley is home to one of the most isolated communities in Central Asia. The Yagnobi people, believed to be descendants of ancient Sogdian speakers whose language predates much of recorded Central Asian history. For much of the year, this high-altitude valley is completely cut off by snow, with no reliable road access and only difficult mountain paths connecting it to the rest of the region. In the Soviet era, authorities forcibly relocated much of the Yagnobi population to lowland areas. Yet some families eventually returned to rebuild their ancestral villages despite the immense hardship of the terrain. Life here means enduring brutal winters, limited medical access, and a landscape where a single landslide or heavy snowfall can sever the only path to the outside world for weeks. The valley's extreme isolation has, paradoxically, been the reason its ancient language and traditions survived at all, protected by the very mountains that threaten its people's safety. Few outsiders ever witness this valley firsthand, and fewer still understand the quiet endurance required to live there year after year. From an isolated valley in Tajikistan, we move to villages in the Indian Himalayas where a frozen river becomes the only road home. In the remote Zanskar region of Ladakh, India, high in the Himalayas, villages exist in near total isolation for much of the year, cut off from the outside world by some of the harshest mountain terrain on the planet. For generations, when winter sealed the mountain passes, the only way in or out was the chadar, a walk across the frozen surface of the Zanskar River itself, a route so dangerous that a crack in the ice could mean instant death in freezing water. Traders, students, and monks once made this journey on foot for days, sleeping in caves along the riverbank, fully aware that the ice beneath them could shift or break at any moment. Even now, with modern roads gradually reaching parts of the region, sudden storms and heavy snow can still leave villages without supplies or emergency access for extended stretches. Life at this altitude also means extreme cold, thin air, and a growing season so short that food security depends on careful planning across the entire year. The people of Zanskar have preserved a distinctive Buddhist culture, with ancient monasteries perched on impossibly high cliffs overlooking the same frozen rivers that once decided who lived and who did not survive the journey home. From frozen rivers in the Himalayas, we travel to the highlands of East Africa, where villages sit at the very edge of some of the deepest canyons on the continent. In the Simien Mountains of northern Ethiopia, small highland villages exist on plateaus that end abruptly in sheer cliffs, dropping thousands of feet into dramatic gorges below. This landscape, shaped by ancient volcanic activity and millions of years of erosion, creates some of the most breathtaking and hazardous terrain in all of Africa. Farmers here cultivate barley and other crops on land that sits perilously close to cliff edges, while livestock and even children must be watched carefully near drop-offs that offer no warning signs or barriers. The region is also home to the endangered Galata baboon and, more dangerously, packs of Ethiopian wolves and spotted hyenas that can threaten livestock and, on rare occasions, people, particularly during the harsher months when food is scarce. Sudden mountain weather, thick fog that can roll in without warning, and rough, high-altitude terrain make both farming and travel here a constant negotiation with risk. Villagers have adapted over centuries, developing an intimate knowledge of the mountain's moods that outsiders could never replicate in a single lifetime. This is a landscape both sacred and unforgiving, farmed by people who have never known another way of life. From African highlands, we now travel to a village in Indonesia that lives in the shadow of an active, unpredictable volcano. On the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, several villages sit on the fertile slopes of Mount Sinabung, a volcano that remained dormant for centuries before roaring back to life in 2010 and continuing intermittent eruptions in the years since. The same volcanic soil that makes this region so productive for farming is also the reason it is so dangerous, because ash, pyroclastic flows, and sudden eruptions have repeatedly forced entire communities to evacuate with little warning. Some villages, sitting within the most dangerous exclusion zones, have been abandoned entirely, their buildings buried under ash and volcanic debris, standing today as ghostly monuments to nature's unpredictability. Farmers who remain nearby continue to work land they know could become uninhabitable again at any moment, weighing economic survival against the very real risk of another eruption. Indonesian authorities closely monitor the volcano's activity, but the mountain's behavior has proven difficult to predict with total certainty, keeping thousands of people in a permanent state of watchfulness. Living here means accepting a bargain that few outsiders could imagine making: fertile land in exchange for living beside a mountain that could erupt again tomorrow or in another decade. From one Indonesian volcano, we travel to another, whose most famous eruption remains one of the deadliest in the country's modern history. On the island of Java, Indonesia, Mount Merapi is considered one of the most active and dangerous volcanoes in the world. And yet villages continue to exist on its fertile slopes, farming land enriched by centuries of volcanic ash. In 2010, a major eruption sent pyroclastic flows racing down the mountainside, destroying entire communities and killing more than 300 people, including a respected spiritual gatekeeper who had chosen to remain near the summit out of traditional duty. Local Javanese beliefs hold that Merapi is guarded by spiritual forces, and for generations, a designated gatekeeper performed ceremonies intended to appease the mountain, a tradition rooted in deep cultural belief rather than verified fact. Though it remains a powerful part of local identity, Despite repeated evacuations and the visible destruction left behind by past eruptions, many farmers return to rebuild as soon as conditions allow, drawn back by land that produces some of the richest harvests in the region. Indonesian volcanologists monitor Merapi continuously, and evacuation systems have improved significantly since past disasters. Yet the mountain's activity can still shift with little warning. Life here is a repeating cycle of loss and rebuilding, a relationship between people and volcano that has lasted for centuries and shows no sign of ending. From a volcano in Indonesia, we travel to an island in Italy where villagers live directly beside one of the most continuously active volcanoes on Earth. Off the northern coast of Sicily, Italy, the island of Stromboli is home to a volcano that has been erupting almost continuously for more than 2,000 years. A phenomenon so persistent that geologists coined the term Strombolian eruption to describe its distinctive rhythmic bursts of lava. The small villages on the island, home to only a few hundred permanent residents, sit remarkably close to a mountain that glows visibly at night, sending up fountains of molten rock in an eruption cycle that never fully stops. While these eruptions are typically small and predictable compared to more explosive volcanoes, larger and more dangerous eruptions have occurred, including events that sent debris and pyroclastic material directly toward inhabited areas. Landslides triggered by volcanic activity have also caused tsunamis in the surrounding waters, a risk that adds an additional layer of danger for a community living on a narrow island with limited escape routes. Despite constant monitoring by Italian volcanologists, residents have chosen to remain, drawn by a landscape found almost nowhere else on the planet and a way of life inseparable from the mountain's fire. Fishermen here still sail beneath a glowing summit each evening, treating the volcano less as a threat and more as a permanent, living neighbor. From an island volcano in Italy, we travel to a canyon in Peru where villages balance on terraces above one of the deepest gorges on the planet. In southern Peru, the town of Cabanatuan sits on the edge of the Colca Canyon, one of the deepest canyons in the world, with depths that in places exceed those of the Grand Canyon in the United States. The surrounding villages rely on an extraordinary system of agricultural terraces, some built over 1,000 years ago by pre-Incan cultures, cut into the steep canyon walls to create farmable land where none should naturally exist. These terraces require constant maintenance because erosion, seasonal rains, and occasional seismic activity from the region's location near active fault lines can weaken the stone retaining walls that keep entire hillsides from collapsing. The canyon is also home to the Andean condor, one of the largest flying birds on Earth, which soars on thermal currents rising from the canyon depths. A majestic but sobering reminder of just how far the ground below truly falls away. Trekkers and locals alike must navigate narrow cliffside paths to move between villages, paths that offer little margin for error during sudden weather changes common at high altitude. Communities here have survived for centuries by mastering a delicate balance between the mountain, the canyon, and a climate that can turn dangerous with little warning. From an Andean canyon, we travel north to villages that farm the slopes of a volcano within sight of one of the largest cities on Earth. Just outside Mexico City, one of the most densely populated urban regions in the world, small farming villages sit directly on the slopes of Popocatépetl, an active volcano whose name means smoking mountain in the Nahuatl language. For centuries, these communities have farmed rich volcanic soil, while living within potential reach of ashfall, lava flows, and dangerous lahars, fast-moving mud flows created when volcanic material mixes with rain or melting snow. Popocatépetl has entered periods of increased activity multiple times in recent decades, prompting evacuation warnings and heightened monitoring by Mexican authorities. Villagers here often describe a deep cultural and even spiritual relationship with the volcano, rooted in indigenous traditions that predate Spanish colonization. Ashfall can disrupt daily life for weeks at a time, damaging crops, complicating air travel, and forcing temporary evacuations. Despite the risk, these farming communities remain deeply attached to land that has sustained their families for generations, choosing to stay within sight of a mountain that could force them to leave everything behind. From Mexico, we travel to the fjords of Norway. Along the dramatic fjords of western Norway, small villages such as Tind sit beneath towering cliffs that have triggered massive rock slides. One of the most devastating recorded events occurred in 1934 when a huge section of the mountain above the fjord broke away and crashed into the water, generating a massive wave that destroyed nearby villages and killed dozens of people in a matter of minutes. Geologists have identified other unstable rock formations in the region that remain under continuous monitoring today, aware a collapse could happen again. Despite this documented history, communities continue to live along these fjords, drawn by fishing, farming, and a landscape among the most beautiful. Modern warning systems now track ground movement on the most dangerous slopes, giving villages precious extra time to evacuate. Winters here also bring heavy snow and avalanche risk on the steep terrain, adding a second layer of seasonal danger beyond the cliffs. Life here has always meant coexisting with beauty and catastrophe. From Norway, we travel further north to a village separated by a single waterfall. On the remote island of Vagar in the Faroe Islands, Gásadalur was, for most of its history, one of the most isolated settlements in the North Atlantic. Cut off from the rest of the island by a steep mountain with no road. For generations, the only way in or out was a narrow, dangerous footpath over the mountain. A route so difficult that mail, supplies, and emergency travel all depended on the willingness of villagers to risk the crossing in brutal Atlantic weather. It was not until 2004 that a tunnel finally connected Gásadalur to the rest of Vagar, ending centuries of near-total isolation. The village sits above a dramatic waterfall that plunges directly into the ocean, a view now famous around the world. For the people who lived there for centuries, it was the edge of an unforgiving home. Fierce storms, sudden fog, and eroding cliffs remain a constant. Gásadalur stands as a reminder of how isolation shaped survival. From the North Atlantic, we travel to a town in Alaska where a community lives inside a single building. On the southern coast of Alaska, the town of Whittier is unlike almost any other community in the United States because nearly all of its roughly 200 residents live inside a single 14-story former military building known as Begich Towers. This unusual arrangement exists because Whittier endures some of the most extreme weather in North America, including hurricane-force winds, relentless snowfall, and near-constant rain driven in from the surrounding mountains and sea. For decades, the only way to reach Whittier by land was through a narrow tunnel shared with a working railway, meaning vehicles could only pass through on a strict, timed schedule, and the town remained effectively isolated outside those windows. Avalanches are a serious and ongoing risk in the steep terrain surrounding Whittier, and the harsh winter conditions have shaped nearly every aspect of daily life, from schooling to grocery shopping, all conducted largely without stepping outside. The area's dramatic fjords and glaciers make it strikingly beautiful, drawing tourists in summer months, but the same geography that creates that beauty also produces some of the most punishing winter weather found anywhere in the country. Whittier remains one of the clearest examples in America of a community reshaping its entire way of life around a landscape too extreme to ignore. From a town inside a building in Alaska, we travel even further into the cold, to an archipelago where polar bears technically outnumber people. On the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard, deep inside the Arctic Circle, the town of Longyearbyen holds the distinction of being one of the northernmost permanently inhabited settlements on Earth. Polar bears roam the surrounding wilderness in large enough numbers that local law requires anyone leaving the town's limits to carry a firearm for protection, a rule taken seriously given documented bear encounters over the years. For part of the year, the sun never rises at all, plunging the town into a prolonged polar night, while during summer months the sun never sets, disrupting sleep cycles and daily rhythms in ways visitors rarely anticipate. Temperatures can fall dramatically below freezing for extended stretches, and the surrounding terrain, glaciers, and unpredictable Arctic weather make travel outside the settlement genuinely hazardous without proper preparation and experience. Longyearbyen also has an unusual local rule against dying within the town, rooted in the historical difficulty of burial in permanently frozen ground, though modern residents facing terminal illness are typically transported elsewhere for care rather than turned away outright. Despite the extremity of the environment, the town supports research stations, coal mining history, and a small permanent community that has adapted to a life lived almost entirely by artificial light for half the year. From an Arctic archipelago governed by ice, we travel to an even more remote settlement, hidden along the frozen coastline of Greenland. On the eastern coast of Greenland, Ittoqqortoormiit is widely regarded as one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth, accessible for much of the year only by small aircraft or, during brief summer windows, by boat through icy waters. The settlement sits near one of the largest fjord systems in the world, surrounded by a landscape of towering ice, drifting icebergs, and sea ice that can trap boats or make travel entirely impossible for months at a time. Polar bears frequently wander close to the settlement, occasionally forcing residents to remain cautious even within what would elsewhere be considered the safety of home, and hunting remains a critical part of local survival and tradition. Winters bring extreme cold and prolonged darkness, testing both the physical and mental endurance of a small population that has chosen to remain in one of the harshest inhabited environments on the planet. Supplies must often be planned months in advance, since weather and ice conditions can delay shipments or flights unpredictably, leaving little room for error in daily life. The Inuit hunting traditions preserved here reflect thousands of years of adaptation to Arctic conditions, knowledge that quite literally determines survival in a landscape with almost no margin for mistakes. From the ice fields of Greenland, we now descend to the very top of the world in another sense entirely, a town so high in the Andes that oxygen itself becomes the enemy. High in the Peruvian Andes, at an altitude of more than 5,000 meters above sea level, sits La Rinconada, widely recognized as the highest permanently inhabited town on Earth. The town exists almost entirely because of gold, drawing thousands of miners who work in brutal, often unregulated conditions. Inside mountainside tunnels in pursuit of a resource that can transform lives or destroy them in a single accident. At this extreme altitude, the air contains roughly half the oxygen found at sea level, forcing every resident's body to adapt constantly to conditions that can cause severe altitude sickness, especially dangerous for newcomers and children. Many miners here still work under a traditional system in which they labor without pay for most of the month, keeping instead whatever ore they can carry out on a single agreed day, a gamble that can yield fortune or nothing at all after weeks of dangerous labor. The use of mercury to separate gold from raw ore has contaminated soil and water in the surrounding area, creating serious long-term health risks that researchers have documented extensively in the region's population. Beyond the altitude and toxic exposure, La Rinconada has also struggled with limited law enforcement, difficult access to clean water and sanitation, and a harsh climate of near-constant cold at an elevation where the human body was never designed to live permanently. And yet, decade after decade, people continue to arrive, drawn by the same golden promise that built this town in the first place, willing to risk their health, their safety, and sometimes their lives for the chance at something better. It is, in many ways, the ultimate expression of everything we have witnessed on this journey, beauty and danger fused so completely that neither can exist without the other. 25 villages, 6 continents, one truth that connects every single one of them. Human beings have never simply accepted the land they were given. They have carved homes into volcanic rock, built staircases up the sides of mountains, crossed frozen rivers on foot, and settled beside volcanoes that could erupt without warning, all because something about that particular piece of earth called to them and refused to let go. These are not stories of recklessness. They are stories of adaptation, of communities who learned to read the moods of a mountain, the rhythm of a tide, the silence before an avalanche, because their survival depended on knowledge no outsider could ever fully replicate. Every terrace cut into a canyon wall, every tower built to withstand both blood feuds and avalanches, every roof shaped to shed centuries of snow represents generations of hard-won wisdom passed from parent to child. Our planet is far stranger, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful than most of us will ever witness firsthand. And somewhere in every one of these places, people are simply living their lives, raising children, tending fields, and calling an extraordinary landscape by a much simpler name, home. If this journey moved you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you want to keep exploring the most extraordinary, hidden, and dangerous corners of our world, because there are still so many more places out there waiting to be discovered.